Welcome back to Virginia Free on Senate Bill 1578. Representing a different point of view is Chris Lloyd of McGuireWoods, who happens to be on our evaluations committee. Welcome, Chris, to this interview, part of the evaluations process. Why don't you dive into the bill and I guess show us your wares
Sure,
on the bill.
Chris, and thanks to you and the other members of the committee for giving me this chance to talk about it. I'll frame up a little bit of background on the issue generally because it's hard to understand Senate Bill 1578 without understanding what came before it and the coalition that came together. Quickly, just so you understand who I'm representing, I represent Hilton Hotels worldwide, which of course is now based in Virginia. The way I got to represent Hilton was I did all their work with their incentive negotiations when they came to Virginia in 2009, and have continued to represent them since then. But on this issue was representing not only Hilton Hotels, but also all of the hotel flags. So that's Marriott, Hyatt, International Hospitality Group, which is the Intercontinental Hotel, and the Holiday Inn. So all the flags, I was carrying their flags for them. Then it was the hospitality industry, so the Virginia Lodging, Restaurant, Travel Association, Eric Terry, but really was working with Julia Hammond on that. Then VML and VACO were very involved with this. The Association of Realtors, so it was Martin Johnson and Chip Dix, and then the Commissioners of Revenue. So we had really come together because of some of the issues that were presented by this concept. You know, as I always say, the whole idea of short-term rentals is nothing new in the world. Jesus was born in a stable because there was no room in the inn. And this has been going on, that people have been renting out rooms in their houses for millennia. There's nothing new about Airbnb or the concept of short-term rentals. What really Airbnb or any of these hosting platforms brings is just a different way for a person who has a need for occupancy and a person who has a room to bring together. And that's really all that the hosting platform does. And so there's really nothing that either this bill or that the previous legislation 2016 was going to do to allow short-term rentals that wasn't already happening in the marketplace. Secondly, what you'll hear about the bill is that it was needed, or at least an earlier version of it was needed because of to clarify some issues with regards to taxes. There is no doubt under current law, or as it always has been, that short-term rentals are subject to state and local taxation. There are numerous tax commissioner rulings, AG rulings on that point. The law is very clear. But to be honest, what we have here is a system where what a hosting platform like Airbnb does is it creates a unified way for a consumer to interface with someone who is offering lodging. And so if you could use that conduit as a way to clean up or make more efficient tax collection and remission, instead of every person who has a house paying it or every person who's doing a rental paying it, if everything's flowing through one system and you can tax that and have the point of taxation at that one system, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And that's something that we said we would support. We, the Hospitality Association, and the industry said we could support. The problem came, though, we were approached by the Airbnb team about 3 weeks before the 2016 session, and they told us that they were planning to introduce this bill, and Virginia was the test state. We were this first state that was going into session. This was a national initiative that Airbnb was rolling out, and that they wanted a system for cleaner tax collection and remission. Again, it wasn't changing the system. It was just that essentially there'd be single point collection and remission is what we called it. And as a concept, localities weren't crazy about that because particularly commissioners of revenue felt like that they were giving up some of their independent authority. But we all thought we could get over that. The concern we had was what came down to two central features as we started to peel back all the layers of the original proposal that Airbnb had, is where we as a coalition had the problems and where we think that a lot of people in the business community would have also problems as well. The first one was the concept of a state override of local zoning. And that was in the original bill. That there were, if you look at the original bill, which was Delegate Peace and Senator Vogel had in 2016, you'll see in there a lot of the word notwithstanding. And whenever you see a piece of legislation that has notwithstanding on it, you need to read it very, very closely. And when you started to read that bill and peel away the layers, you saw a number of occasions where essentially the state was coming in and preempting local zoning control. And while, I think we all complain about how crazy local governments can get, we all joked about it in our coalition that you just never can tell what local government's going to do. The idea that the state would come in and a long time process that's been, enshrined in Virginia law and constitution of that localities have the right to control land use was going to be overridden at the state level for this one narrow use. That essentially localities would be prohibited from enacting any requirements or restrictions on short-term rentals, particularly for those for principal residences. And I think that just gave us a lot of pause. Well, what's so special about this? Just because it's an app, why should it have some special treatment with regards to zoning? But the real issue that I think we had a problem with was secrecy of tax information. And that was the way the scheme that was set up under that 2016 legislation. It essentially said, okay, Airbnb will, and I'm sure you heard this term from Edward, will step into the shoes of the host. And Airbnb would collect the taxes and they would pay them to the state, to the locality, both sales taxes and the transient occupancy taxes that were due. But when they would pay them, all the information would be anonymized. And so Airbnb would stroke a check to Henrico County and say, trust us, this is what we collected. This is what we collected, and this is what you're owed, trust us. And there was a total prohibition on the Department of Taxation, a local commissioner of revenue, anybody to audit or back check that. And that just, all of us just had a real problem with that. It's just the idea of secrecy of tax information. And there's just, I think, we feel, okay, yeah, this is cool, this is trendy, this is a great app, but just the idea that tax information should be secret, I think caused us a lot of problems. So, it just that seemed to violate so many business principles. It seemed to violate so many traditions of Virginia with regards to zoning, with regard to tax information. Even when you talk to the Department of Taxation privately, they said, the idea that we're creating one class of people that have no auditability or traceability with regards to tax information, that's unprecedented. We really have serious problems with that and the precedents that sets. Okay, this year it's short-term rentals, next year it's recycling, and next year it's ride sharing, and next year it's the industry of the month. And just the idea that none of us likes to go through an audit or likes to have reviews, but there's just sometimes there's just checks and balances in government that we should resort to. So we couldn't reach agreement during the 2016 session, whereas a number of other states actually did move forward with the Airbnb legislation. We actually put it into a study done by the Housing Study Commission, looked at the issue throughout the year, and we couldn't come to an agreement on some sort of compromise because Airbnb did insist on this override of local zoning control and this tax secrecy. And that's just a central tenet that we couldn't get over. So what we did in 2017 is neither they nor we decided to put in a piece of legislation, but Senator Norman decided on his own, without our input, I might add, to put in a piece of legislation, which is Senate Bill 1578. Senator Stanley had a similar bill, although it was much more radical, that would essentially merely reaffirm the right of local government to regulate short-term rentals and to require registration. That did go through, and we think it's does it really harm Airbnb? It certainly does not. Does it solve the problems or some of the issues that are created by Airbnb or short-term rentals? Probably it helps a little bit. We think that local registration is a good thing. With the bill now passed, our working group, meaning local governments, the commissioners, the realtors, and the hospitality industry, have been sitting down to come up with, well, let's, instead of having 140 different rules all across the state with all the localities, let's create a model ordinance for localities. Let's create a model way that registration should be done, and also create a single point of if you go to a locality to go ahead and register, you also then are not only registered with the locality, you register with the Commissioner of Revenue, and you register with the State Department of Taxation. So trying to make it a unified approach. So we're trying to streamline it. So in closing, we think that our approach is one that treats all businesses in the hospitality realm equally. It doesn't create a lot of secret preferences and bad tax precedents. Just because there's an app for it doesn't mean you don't have to play by the traditional rules. All of us represent companies that are subject to disruption, and that's not a bad thing. It's something I think we should all embrace. But there are just some legal principles that we all thought were pretty sacred that need to be protected, and we think that the approach that's been taken with Senate Bill 1578 is better than the alternative. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to be a year down the road, as we approach next session and come up with, something that we all think is actually pretty decent. The last thing I'll say, Chris, is just the real concern that I think the hospitality industry and a lot of other people that on our side have. It's not the mom who needs a little bit extra cash and is letting out her basement. That's where I think Airbnb tries to sell this, and that's really no problem. That's no threat to anyone. Nobody has a problem with that. Where the real threat is what we call illegal hotels. And what you're seeing in a lot of the big cities around the country, and it's now starting, is people are buying up 20, 30, 40, 50 unit buildings and turning them into de facto hotels and running them through Airbnb. So they're skirting all local zoning, all taxation, ADA requirements, you name it. And that is, you can look in the Wall Street Journal, you can look, there have been a number of articles written about the REITs are starting to get into this, and that was our real concern, was we just needed to create a process for blocking, people coming into residential neighborhoods, commercial neighborhoods, and, just turning them into flop houses. And with that, Chris, I'd be glad to take any questions or refine.
Okay. Well, speak to the bill, and you and Edward both gave a history, I think a very comprehensive view of this, and been very helpful to both members of the evaluations committee. And if it goes to the board, it will go to the board. Speak to the bill itself and why it's pro-business.
Sure. I think it's pro-business because in the end, all 1578 does is, like I noted, was it reaffirms the right of local government to regulate these activities, and I want to emphasize reasonably regulated, and I think that is you've had, in the absence of any state direction. There have been certain localities, Richmond, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Harrisonburg, a couple of others, that have outright banned short-term rentals. They're still happening no matter what. You go on Airbnb right now, it is illegal in Richmond to do a short-term rental under the local law. And you go on Airbnb right now and you will find hundreds of properties around the city of Richmond listed on Airbnb. So you've essentially created an illegal business concept where people are operating in flagrant violation of the law. As we have talked to localities, I think they felt that if 1578 passed and reaffirmed the right of a locality to have some sort of registration process, that was pro-business, because it essentially brought an activity that's already happening that nobody should really be opposed to, but brought it into the light. And that's a good thing. We shouldn't have underground economies happening in Virginia. We shouldn't have illegal activity happening in Virginia where people operating in flagrant violation of law. And I think when you talk to a Richmond or Norfolk, and those discussions are already happening, they said, if we just had something, which is the structure 1578 provides, that reaffirms our ability to register these, then we're willing to make it legal. We just wanted to know where these people are, because we get calls in the middle of the night, hey, there's a bunch of frat guys in our neighbor's next yard shooting off fireworks and getting drunk. And without a registration system, you didn't know how to track those people down or hold them accountable or how to collect taxes on that. So that's first and foremost is taking activity that's already happening, that's happening in what I would call the shadow economy, and making it legitimate. And I think that is a pro-business kind of thing. Second point, what 1578 avoided was what I thought what the earlier legislation did, and that was violate a lot of pro-business principles. And that is, I think that businesses like predictability, they like knowing what the rules of the road were, and really what the earlier legislation did was throw all those out the window. And so instead of throwing them out the window, we've got a process which essentially reaffirms local right to register, reaffirms the ability to collect taxes and remit taxes in an efficient manner without throwing out principles of local control of zoning, without throwing out tax secrecy. And I think that's something that, as representing business, we should find comfort in, because again, I don't think any of us wants to be subject to some market disruptor coming in and not playing by the long established rules that we all hold sacred here in Virginia. That's
okay. Well, that's a good argument to make. One of the principles of the free enterprise system is rule of law. And having it uniform, having it consistent is a credible argument. Speak to the issue that the bill really didn't do that much. in the
Right.
end. It's just when you because the reaffirming of existing law doesn't really move the needle. But with that, will localities or are they moving towards a system or saying, well, we're going to make it legal now?
Yeah, that's exactly what is happening, Chris, and I think that's a good point. Is I'll be honest, localities were very much asleep at the switch at this. Is I think they saw short-term rentals happening, but I think there was an assumption of, well, that's New York City's problem or that's San Francisco's problem, and we really don't have an issue here in Virginia, or even if we do, it's just Sandbridge or maybe it's Smith Mountain Lake. And really, what you when you go on Airbnb now, almost every person, I mean, in fact, I ask everybody who's going to listen to this, go on Airbnb, put in your address, and look what's going on in your own neighborhood or within 2 miles of you, and you would be shocked. And I think localities, I don't think until this bill happened, that a lot of localities didn't realize how much was happening out there. And so while the bill, you're right, the bill doesn't do a whole lot in and of itself other than reaffirm local jurisdiction and local right to taxation. I think it woke up local governments to, hey, we need to have a process in place for dealing with this. Let's create a process that's reasonable, that's not draconian, that's not anti-business. And I think we all know that sometimes localities can be very anti-business, or can make it very difficult to operate in the free market enterprise system. So I think those of us on the hospitality side said, well, if we put something into place that reaffirms local authority, it also puts some limits around what localities can do, and it forces them to be reasonable, which I think we all think is a good thing. And that's what where the process we're now going through is with a model ordinance, with a model tax process. Is yeah, the bill itself doesn't do a whole lot, but I think it gave localities the backbone that they needed to go out and say. It gave them the backbone, but also constrained them. It gave them the backbone to, okay, we're not going to continue to make this illegal, which some localities have, so let's go ahead and legalize and encourage the free enterprise system. But also, we can only do it in such a way that isn't prohibitive to or too restrictive of people that just want to make a little bit extra money. So I think what the bill does, and now as it starts to roll out all across the state, there's going to be a series of meetings for VML, VACO, the Local Government Attorneys Association, all have this is their topic for conferences for the next 2 months. And this is something we've scripted out, is how to go about putting a reasonable framework into place. So while 1578, isn't a whole lot to it, it's going to precipitate a process that unfolds all across the state that I think everybody will find is good.
Okay. Do you think, or have you heard of localities moving to making it legal?
Yeah, Richmond being the first one. What now is happening, of course, with the General Assembly settled, is localities. The governor has signed the bill; it's now in effect. If any of you follow the Richmond paper and have been following the budget,
was it emergency clause or July 1st?
It is. No, I'm sorry. You're correct. It is a July 1st effective date. Thank you.
Okay.
But the governor has signed it. The governor signed it, and so we've been putting everything into place to make sure that it trips in on. But again, since it reaffirms local law, how much do you really have to wait? But if you've been following the Richmond budget discussion, they're talking about, well, how do we raise revenue in the city of Richmond? One of the objects is already on the table is, well, let's go ahead and legalize Airbnb because that, if we legitimize it, then we're going to get revenue to close some of our budget gaps. You're seeing that discussion taking place in Norfolk and other places around the state. So you're already seeing that. Well, let's go ahead. It's already happening. We've now got a process. It's already unfolding across the state. A lot of localities are now starting, the local attorneys are starting to draft the ordinance along the model that we're starting to work out, and I think you're already seeing a lot of activity. So that July 1, when the bill does come into effect, things start to fall into place really quickly.
Okay, because what we're trying to do is embrace the disruption economy, the technology that's coming all over the place, seemingly. As we said and I've said often, just trying to sort of get a cultural recap of where the evaluations committee is before we present to the board is, welcome to Virginia, wipe your feet. We want to make sure that we're doing it the right way, but you don't bring in what we don't want. But that, because Virginia goes first, we're often the test ground, so we want to make sure we get it right here, so other states go, oh, look what Virginia did, because that's what happens. Let's just be honest. That's just what happens.
Yep.
So we have a special responsibility here to make sure we get this right. Whether we score the bill or present it in our narrative as part of that larger discussion is very, very important for us. We can do both, of course, or we can do either. So,
Right, and I'll be honest, Chris, I struggled with when you sent around the bill list about whether this would be a bill that people get scored on, because while I think I've laid out a case about how the bill does align with the principles of Virginia Free and align with principles of pro-business principles, you know, you look at the bill, it passed overwhelmingly. Is it a do or die? I mean, is this going to be a bill that people hold up and say, wow, this shows Virginia's a pro-business, we're going to turn around the economy
right.
bill? No. And that's why I struggled with whether it should or should not be on the on the list. But that being said, I do think it does show what the points it emphasizes or draws out are some of the ones that I made earlier. And instead of a rush to judgment, and there are two paths of rush to judgment. You could either go the New York path, which is what they went, where they've done everything they can to stymie this. Which is, of course, not what we want to do in Virginia. Or you could go the complete free enterprise, not the free, you could go the, no holds barred route, which is what Arizona did. And it's a completely disruptive of all rules and precedents for this one narrow interest, which I think, again, I think we found problems with. So I think we've charted a middle path, which is very consistent with what way we do things in Virginia.
Which I would tend to agree with you as far as the process being important, the Virginia way, incremental progress that everyone can, as we used to say in the House committees, peace in the valley. Can we all
Right.
live with this and move happily off into the sunset?
And I'll note that a couple other states are now starting to follow Virginia lead. Tennessee is on the verge of adopting something very similar. Hawaii's coming in. I mean, I think a lot of people go, oh, wow, Virginia really sat back. They spent a year looking at it. How can we do this reasonably? And, there's some lessons to be learned there.
If we go the narrative route on this, having that spelled out is very important for the business community to know that they have a voice not only in reaffirming existing law to make sure that they can combat the being banned, but also that we're going to take a measured, modest approach to these kinds of issues as they come up. We're not going to treat them like piñatas at birthday parties,
right.
politically, which I think is a welcome change to what most business people think about politics these days.
Yes.
Okay. Final words?
No, I really appreciate y'all's consideration. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions. But we're excited about this.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take
Bye.
care.